she actually asked me, she was like, what, you guys playing a game? How did that relate to, your course? And I was like, no, it was a review game. But it just sounded like everybody was having fun, and so she had no idea.
No, that doesn't sound like
Stupid names like
Oh, man.
Emperor of Mankind, as I told Thomas after he froze me, Thomas, I'm gonna steal your kneecaps.
So can I have everyone's face on the screen, please? Face on the screen. Face on the screen. Okay.
Face on the screen. You guess the distance from my iPad. Here's 1 foot for reference.
Grace, you should play Horse Tales with me or not.
It's almost. So what's what's interesting? You can measure what the distance is of your the visual that the camera sees with that. Do you know what I'm saying? Anyway. All right. So anyway, long story short. So when she came into our class, I don't think of us. I'm gonna say to you guys anyway. She said she heard some cursing. I don't know, but just make sure you guys. I don't think it was you guys, but I just wanted to let you know, just to make sure that I'm covering them. So make sure you don't curse in class. It goes without being said. Okay. So last class, really quickly.
Yeah. When I get a webcam for my PC, would it be okay if I actually use a computer to join Google Meet?
Oh my God, yes. I don't use that. I use my.
Thank you. I can use all the I have a soundboard.
1 second. Bryce, Danny, and not here, but Bryce and Danny, go ahead and log into class with me, please. Please.
I logged in with 3 different cameras.
Yeah, you got like a whole militia.
Okay.
I have my iPad, so my computer.
So my turn. My turn. All right. So I have everyone as soon as you guys get into iClicker, I want to see your faces this entire time. As we're going through this, you should stay on me because that's how you're going to be able to see my screen. Perfect. Love it. We're going to really quickly go over the last few slides of the medieval instruments that were developed, and as soon as I see that you can see my screen, then we will begin. It should say, there you go. Can you see yourself? Yeah.
I can see you, Thomas, through the camera.
Nick, your glasses are very classy. I like it.
Okay. So, you guys should, like I said, see my instruments, or it's not my instruments, my screen right now. Is that true?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So last class we were talking about the medieval period. I just wanted to go over these instruments because a lot of these instruments are instruments that you see today, or that were developed from the instruments that you see today. So the first one is the fiddle, which and I did show you a little bit, but I just wanted to kind of bring it in since I'm going to be talking about it. It was developed from the Byzantine lyra. And it had a different number of strings. It wasn't always the same number, okay, Thomas? As you can see here, mine is not in ideal shape. First of all, I have eight pegs, so I have 8 strings. I want to get it fixed because there's a giant, you can see that gouge right there. So it doesn't play. I can show you already. So
all the acoustics are off.
It's because it's broken. I mean, when I play it, if I put my finger right where this hole is, it is vibrating. So it's definitely broken. But but you can see that it is similar to it is the similar shape to kind of what you see in the picture. So right here it says played upright. So you would have played it the lyra is all different shapes and sizes. If you played it upright, it would sit in your lap and you would play it like this. As you can see, the fiddle then took it to the chin, or at least to the shoulder as you started to play it. And the modern day violin, which was based on the fiddle, which was based on the lyra, was first developed in 1500. And as a fun fact, you guys probably know this, but I'm going to ask, what is the most famous maker of violins ever?
Yamaha.
Oh my gosh, you guys don't know?
It feels familiar. Like, it's like
Oh. No, okay. So, fun fact, if you get a violin that was made by this violin maker that I'm about to tell you right now, if you get a violin made by this violin maker, it is easily worth, like, a broken one is worth $200,000. Like,
are they the ones that like sound like
I'm gonna go
better than
check
any
my
other?
mom's
Like
violin.
nobody knows how to make them.
they're just they had, you know how people say bagels from New York are better than anywhere on the planet,
Yeah, these
and
these, like sound weird.
it has to do with like the water, because there's no water like anywhere in New York, which, by the way, fun fact, did you know that New York has some of the cleanest water in the United States? Fun fact.
That's crazy.
I know.
Let's just get
But anyway, so for whatever reason, the violin name is called Stradivarius. And if you ever see a Strat, they call it a Strat or Stradivarius. It's worth a whole bunch of money. Okay. The next instrument that they started to develop in the medieval period is a guitarn, which, as you can see just in its name, looks like guitar. Okay, it is the ancestor to the guitar. The strings were made out of animal guts. It was similar to the lute, which is kind of its contemporary / a little bit older than the guitarn. They used a quill, which is the feather thingy of a bird, to pluck it, and the body and the neck kind of, you know how in a guitar you have the body and you have the neck. With the guitarn, it was just kind of one giant shape, and you couldn't really tell where one started and one ended. The next one is the dulcimer. The dulcimer is really pretty and very interesting, a very unique sound. You hold hammers and you hit the strings with hammers, which is very similar to a modern day instrument that we have, which is an instrument that has strings that you hit with hammers is
piano.
Piano. Thank you. Oh lordy.
Oh.
I was thinking like string.
So
Thinking of about a string.
if you have a piano is hit with hammers. Anyway, so the dulcimer is similar to that, where you have strings and you hit it with the instruments. And it was from all over the world, so it wasn't just Western Europe, including Mesopotamia, which my history buffs is modern day.
Mesopotamia.
No, Mesopotamia is modern day.
Fertile Crescent.
Oh my god! All right, you guys better find that out.
Saudi Arabia.
Oh, it's
Wait,
on the...
wait, Miss Burke, which one? Which
Mesopotamia.
one? Isn't that Turkey?
I'll look it up.
I can't think of it, but I know
What
it.
is
I know
modern
it.
day?
Looking up is cheating. You should know it.
I'm gonna call somewhere around Turkey.
Iran, Syria, and Turkey.
Oh, I knew it.
Yeah, it's modern day Iran.
Oh dang! I was gonna say if it's Turkey, then
I knew Allah reigns supreme there.
Anyway, so Mesopotamia. All right, and then the next instrument that actually began to be developed during this time was the trumpet. And the trumpet was developed. It had a very limited range. There were no valves. It was just a long tube with a mouthpiece and a bell. And it was used because it was able to be heard across battles. So like, you know, if there was, I mean, you've seen history movies, right? If there's a person in the um oh my goodness, what's the turret? If you see someone at the top of the castle and blow the warning horn as, you know, the battle is raging, you could hear it for a very long distance over the battle. And so that was the beginning of the trumpet. Like I said, it had no valves, it had a very small range, you could only do a couple of different pitches, but that is the ancestor to our modern day trumpet. Okay? All right, and then lastly, you have percussion. So percussion has been around. That's probably the easiest one that we've had. From you know that there have been music, or cavemen would bang rocks together, right? Like percussion is easy. You do it as part of your everyday. You got fidgets, you tap your table, like whatever the case may be. So, but they did develop specific percussion instruments, the tambourine being one of them, and skin stretcher over drums being the other one. Okay, so that is the end of medieval instruments. That was what I wanted to finish for last class. So today we are going to go to dun, 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 musical Renaissance. This is considered the second half of the early period. So the early period of music is medieval and Renaissance. That's where, and if you can remember the timeline that I have of the very first day, I had one slide that had the composers from the medieval and Renaissance period, and then a whole separate slide that had all 4 to 5 other time periods. That's why, even though there are only 2 time periods in the early period, it's because they encompassed many hundreds of years. Okay, so because just like everything, and you're going to learn today why, and you probably already know. I know you already know, but I'll specifically tell you why music developed so much faster starting right at the Renaissance into Baroque. Okay, so quick history review about what the Renaissance is. So the Renaissance was considered the shake-up of thought. So it was kind of the ability for people to start thinking for themselves. Renaissance being new, and rebirth, exactly. And so because of that, you had new ideas and thoughts and concepts were being developed, and we're gonna talk about the rebirth in music specifically. So it's the center of the Renaissance started to begin. It started to begin in 14th century Florence because they had strong economic and political stability, and because of the spread of literacy, which, if you remember from the medieval presentation last week, that was the reason why in the late medieval period people were able to start learning music more commonly. Okay, something that you can actually see, and if you've ever taken any sort of art class, they should have talked about what perspective is. You have like the forefront, they're like the different lines of perspection. But in the Renaissance art, you can start to see that you will put that, not you, that the Renaissance painters began to, it wasn't one flat scene, okay? It's where things became 2D, and you could see that there was, columns in the front and then people in the background. Before, it was just one entire scene where you couldn't tell that the columns were in front of the people. It just looks like the people were there, and then there was a column, and then there was people, and there was a column, okay? And this style, this ability, really developed and flourished during the Renaissance. And in addition to the perspective and geometry and art, there was also this new idea that politics weren't about taking everybody over, but maybe you can have diplomacy. Yeah. So, all right. So this rebirth is talking about their the people during that time period, their history. So they began to have a reinterest in Greek and Roman philosophies, where they were no longer the philosophies of like this is what they thought, like thought philosophy, but instead it was action philosophy. So they would start to think about how the thoughts of Greek and Roman philosophers could then be transposed and put into action, if you will. Opera. So opera, which a lot of people don't, I think a lot of people don't understand opera and then therefore don't like opera. But opera was their modern recreation of Greek drama. So, and the fun thing about, and this will be a recurring theme throughout this entire presentation, the really important thing to know about the Renaissance is that it was no longer music and art for worship. But it became something that people, you know, they had a little bit more time, or they had, it was no longer agrarian, whatever, you know that word. They had a little bit of time to sit and enjoy the arts. And it wasn't, like I said, just about worship. When they were able to enjoy music for entertainment, it actually became commercially successful for people to create music, to create instruments, and to have that become a stable, not a stable, a staple in a family's lifestyle. Families began to sing and play music on their own, so it wasn't just that they were going to church to listen to music, but they learned how to play instruments, and then they would have jamborees in their own house where they owned their instruments and they can play themselves. And then wealthy families would hire professional musicians to come play for them because, you know, money. All right. One of the first composers of this time period was John Dunstable. He was late medieval, early Renaissance. If you see from our time, 1390, the Renaissance began in the 1400s, give or take. So he was like it says, late medieval, early Renaissance. The dates, just so that you guys understand, are always like roughly 1400 to 1600 was the Renaissance, because history was a lot less exact back in that time. John Dunstable, he became famous because he composed music for the king's brother. The king was King Henry V. And he was an astronomer, astrologer, mathematician. That's him. That's an older picture of him. Well, not a picture, painting of him. And then, but if you were to like look him up, you can see tons of different paintings showing who he was. And the really interesting thing is all of them had this like, he'd had this very pronounced and distinct nose. And it's kind of interesting to sort through all of the paintings that are of him, and every single one of them like made it a point to show that he had this really distinct nose. As you can see, it's really hard to see. I know that it's really hard to see, but you can start to kind of look at the music. It looks a lot more complex. There's a lot more of it than there was in the medieval time period. Okay, so here we're going to talk about the development of the third interval. So the history of the third really does still go towards the Holy Trinity, but how it was developed is, and what they were able to see, is super interesting. So at that time, it was considered dissonant. It had the option or the ability to make it in music right now, has the ability to make something sound major or to make it sound minor. And here you're going to see, okay, so I'm going to play in a second. I have a virtual keyboard that I'm going to play for you. But here is the piano chord. The C, E, G is the major third. So if you see this C, E, G here, this chord right here, that is a major third. chord, which you can see here. The minor is going to be, if you flatten this middle part of the chord, it becomes a minor chord. Diminished means okay. There's so much like theory in here. So a major chord is going to have that CEG is a major third with a minor third. The minor chord is going to be a minor third with a minor third. The diminished chord is going to be a minor third with a diminished minor third. And then the augmented chord is going to be a major third with an augmented third. And I'm going to play those sounds for you just so you can hear them. Okay? So I know that's a lot. I know a lot of it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I will at least give you the opportunity to hear what it sounds like so that you can hear that. So give me 2 seconds as this loads up. Now you're gonna have to tell me if you can hear this or not, okay? Can you hear? Just give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Did you hear that? No? Okay, hold on. Yes? Okay. All right, so here we go. This is the major triad. Got? Sounds happy, sounds pretty, right? This is the minor chord, minor triad. You hear the difference? Listen again. Right? Okay. So then you have the diminished third, or the diminished triad. So major, minor, major, minor, diminished. Can you hear the difference between the minor and diminished? Listen to it. Right? And then this is major, this is augmented. You hear how it raised? Listen to it again. Right? So all four of them put together in order. So it's going to be major, minor, diminished, augmented. Okay? All right. How many of you guys were able to, can you let me know how many of you guys were able to like hear all that? Could you hear the difference between the four?
Yeah.
My question is, which of those four chords was the most difficult to hear what I was talking about? Oops. Which of those four chords? So you have major, minor, diminished, and augmented.
I mean, all of them sounded pretty distinct.
Okay. What about you, Thomas?
I would say the difference between minor and diminished.
Okay. Anyone else? Danny, what do you think? No, what? Talk to me. What? Whisper Mouse, what?
I couldn't tell.
You couldn't tell the difference? Grace, what about you?
I can hear a difference between all of them. They were distinct.
Did any of them, here's my next question. Between those, Naisa, which two did you feel like were the most obvious, like, difference?
The major and the minor.
You could hear that the most, the major and minor? Yeah. So anyway, so at this point is when they really started to develop this concept of the triad of having major happy sounding music and minor sad sounding music. So at this point, composers were actually able to create emotion in music. Whereas before, do you remember, Sean, what is the name, Sean, of the medieval church created comparable to our scales that told us where things were like, you know, holy or sad. There are 7 of them.
I can't remember.
Nikki? Focus. What are they?
What was the question again?
Focus. The question again was, what in the medieval period did and the church created this system similar to our major and minor scales, where it was the only option that composers had in order to create like happy or sad sounds, and there are 7 of them. Examples: Ionian, Dorian,
Those.
Phrygian,
I know what you're talking about.
Locrian.
I forgot some of them.
Anyone who remembers? Oh, tisk tisk tisk. The modes, modes, M-O-D-E-S, modes. Remember, boys and girls, that this is going to be on your final test of everything that we're doing, okay? Because I do want you paying attention, because it is interesting. It is stuff that 100% relates to everything that we do. All right. The Renaissance continued. So, as you can continue seeing, the complexity between art and music continues to grow. You have some of the most famous painters of our knowledge were creating paintings that everyone knows, right? Michelangelo being one of the most famous. But things started to become a lot more complex. There were lots of details. You could see the faces in detail. You could see strands of grass or cloud tufts or whatever the case may be. Like the in addition to music becoming more complex, the art became more complex, which is really fun. Okay, last little bits of Renaissance kind of trivia information. It was still very religious, just because they opened it up for other composers to write music, but it was still very heavily religious. Excuse me. The religious composers were influenced by art that they were surrounded by of their time period. And if you remember, during the medieval time, the composers of music were meant to be anonymous, because you were supposed to be composing music for the church as a like an offertory gift for the church. But at this point, composers actually started to become famous, like little celebrities. So that's a change. Now, the Gutenberg. This was one of the main reasons why music after this point, music kind of spiraled in its ability to become more complex, to become highly developed, to have composers have their own style and genre. The reasons being, the Gutenberg allowed music to be duplicated exactly. So it was no longer a composer wrote a piece of music and then they gave that music to a transcriber, and then that person had to just write it by hand over and over and over again. Well, as you know, when you do things by hand, mistakes happen, right? So because of the Gutenberg, there were no more mistakes. The composer wrote the piece of music, they put it through the press, and it came out exactly as it was supposed to be. It unified musical language, because no longer was it one person in one place and another person another and another person another writing music and no one really understanding or knowing how things were written. It actually became unified. And then because you were able to print things, just like everything else during this time period, because you were able to print things with ease as opposed to what it was before, the ability for other people to become and develop their own style and genre was increased. There are two composers that we're going to quickly, briefly talk about. The first is Thomas Tallis and William Byrd, and the second one is William Byrd. During this time period, they were given exclusive rights to the Gutenberg. So no one else was able to print music during this time period in England. It was given to them by Queen Elizabeth I, and they had a 21-year monopoly on printing music in England. Just think about that for a second. 21 years, no one else was allowed to print music, i.e. Gutenberg press print music, in the entire country of England. They had some success and they had a lot of failure. The first composer, Thomas Tallis, he came in and was a resident composer for 4 different monarchs. He was what is considered the church's best early composer of music. So he's one of the names that we know, again, because people were able to actually accept credit for their work. And he was a primary composer of choral music. He had a pupil, William Byrd, which is one of the more famous instrumental composers. He was a pupil of Tallis's. They wrote this piece, Canciones qua ab argumento sacre vocantur, which was a flop. So they had the ability to only compose for themselves, and it was a flop, and people were not excited about their music. I think maybe they were scared because of the fact that they were the only ones allowed, etc., etc. And he was a primary composer of piano music, polyphony, and consort music, which I will explain to you just right in this second. Okay, so we're gonna end here. I'm going to play for you. Can I play for you? Did I leave it up here? I didn't. Okay, so what I'm gonna do instead is we're going to finish with the Renaissance next class. We're gonna move on to the Baroque. I'm trying to get all of the pertinent information in these slides and go as quickly as I possibly can, but time's just not enough. So I am going to end our class here. If you guys have any questions, I should have, when you have the end of your class on iClicker, does it give you yet? It does not give you the, or one of these days it'll give you the thing. Anyway, thank you to those of you that came to tutorial yesterday to do your scales. If you don't remember that you have scales to do, please check the calendar. You do have work due on Saturday. If you have any questions about any of it, you must see a tutorial so that I can explain it. Okay. Any last minutes for the